The oldest original document in Hempology.org's Hemp History Museum is a tithe act issued by King William and Queen Mary in 1691. This shows the value placed on hemp and flax, and I quote, "Whereas the sowing of hemp and flax is and would be exceeding beneficial to England, by reason of the multitude of people that are and would be employed in the manufacture of those two materials, and therefore do justly deserve great encouragement." End quotes. During this period in England, tithes representing 1/10 of the crop produced, in this case hemp and flax, would be paid to the parson or vicar of the local parish. The payments were oftentimes stored in sheds or tithe barns attached to the parish. During the 1700s, subsidies and bounties were granted in Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, North and South Carolina, and in New England to encourage hemp cultivation and the manufacturing of cordage and canvas. Unfortunately, these incentives failed to establish a long-term and permanent hemp industry in these states. Germans migrating to Pennsylvania brought with them their culture of cultivating and processing hemp, resulting in an extensive industry during the 1700s. In 1767, a different type of hemp softening machine was installed at the Bethlehem oil mill. The hemp roller was a large, heavy, conical-shaped stone, and an axle through the hemp stone was attached to the vertical drive shaft of a water wheel, causing the hemp stone to go around a circular bed filled with hemp fiber. As the hemp stone rolled around the circle, the hemp fiber would be softened. Similar hemp mills in Europe were said to process up to 200 pounds of hemp fiber in 8 hours. Pennsylvania hemp historian Les Stark, author of the book Hempstone Heritage, relates the story of George Washington visiting such a hemp mill in action, and unfortunately he witnessed an accident where a worker got his arm caught under the hemp stone, resulting in a serious injury. This persuaded Washington that this was not the best way to process hemp, and by 1800 historical references and mentions of this process had diminished. Les Stark is now the official keeper of the hemp stone, and you can see him during a lighter moment planking on a hemp stone at a recent hemp festival in Philadelphia. In 1791, Ben Franklin published an article by Abby Braille about a new mode of cultivating and processing hemp. This was one of the first articles on hemp published in an American publication. The interesting point about this article is that this new mode involves water retting of hemp, as opposed to the dew or field retting. Braille writes, "Put 12 handfuls of hemp together to make a bundle, then lay the bundles in the water, which ought to be a running and clean water, and if shaded and overhung with trees, the better. Lay poles or planks or whatever else you have that is suitable across a large number together so as to keep them at least 2 inches under water. At the end of 6 days, visit the hemp. This time, the time required for soaking depends very much on the nature of the hemp, the weather, and the water it is soaked in. From 6 to 9 days. It is obvious that all these operations would be carried on to the most advantage near some running stream or large lake, if it be a standing water, on account of the great use that is made of that element, and to save a great deal of the trouble of transportation." And that's end quote. While processing female hemp plants in this manner would result in extremely fine hemp similar to flax, water retting of hemp did not become the standard. In the late 1820s, in upstate New York, the Farmer's Herald office reported that a hemp decorticator was invented by Joseph Hines and William Baines. A decorticator is a machine that removes the bast fiber from the inner hurd of the hemp stalk. The decorticated hemp produced more than enough hurds in this machine, also known as shives, to power the machine's steam engine, saving 2 cords of wood per day. Water retting the hemp was recommended before the hemp was processed through the machine. The reporter held such a high opinion of this machine that he wrote, quote, "There is no branch of agriculture that will afford as great a profit or contribute so vastly to advance the wealth and prosperity of the country as that of the culture of hemp, aided by said machine, and that without such aid the great labor and expense of preparing it for market would continue, as heretofore, to discourage its cultivation. We are therefore clearly convinced that the invention and introduction of this machine by Mr. Hines, in a national point of view, will ultimately confer the most lasting and important benefits upon his country, and at no distant day be looked upon as constituting the brightest era in the history of American agriculture." End quote. So you can see he was placing a lot of faith, and he really must have thought this machine could really clean a lot of hemp in a good way. Unfortunately, these high expectations from the 1820s were not realized, and the use of this newly developed decorticator apparently rather quietly was placed onto the scrap heap of history, because it doesn't appear that this was used in the future, because they continued to try to invent and develop new machines to decorticate the hemp fiber. In 1830, Thaddeus Fairbanks of St. Johnsbury, Vermont, invented a scale that could weigh entire wagon loads of hemp fiber that was grown throughout the Northeast Kingdom and upstate New York. And the Fairbanks Scale Company is still going strong today. Both President Washington and President Jefferson grew and researched hemp, but the quality of Russian hemp could not be produced on the large scale needed for the fledgling democracy's ever-growing fleet of sailing ships. Washington instructed people to sow hemp everywhere, and Jefferson even invented a hemp brake. Jefferson wrote this about hemp in one of his many books, quote, "Hemp, plow the ground for it early in the fall and very deep. If possible, plow it again in February before you sow it, which should be in March. A hand can tend 3 acres of hemp a year. Tolerable ground yields 500 pounds to the acre. You may generally count on 100 pounds for every foot the hemp is over 4 feet high. A hand will break 60 or 70 pounds a day, and even to 150 pounds. About hemp seed, Jefferson wrote, "Seed. To make hemp seed, make hills of the form and size of cucumber hills, from 4 to 6 feet apart, in proportion to the strength of the ground. Pinch about a dozen seeds into each hill in different parts of it. When they come up, thin them to 2. As soon as the male plants have shed their farina, cut them up, that the whole nourishment may go to the female plants. Every plant thus tended will yield a quart of seed. A bushel of good brown seed is enough for 1 acre." In 1812, Jefferson recognized that cotton was a better source for fabric when he noted, quote, "This cotton is spun so much more cheaply than hemp and flax that it will be substituted entirely for coarse shirting." Now in Russia, it was common practice to submerge the hemp in water to hasten the retting process, whereas in America, field retting was a common practice which resulted in hemp fiber of lesser quality, especially for use on the sailing warships of the day. Now to determine which was better, American or Russian hemp, in the 1820s, the United States Navy rigged half of the frigate Constellation with each type of hemp. After 2 years in service, the Constellation's commander said that while both types of hemp were similar, he preferred the Russian hemp. In 1839, the Navy's Showcase Rope Walk in Charlestown, Massachusetts used 2,733 tons of hemp. This was in 1839. Out of that 2,733, 2,500 tons was Russian hemp, 200 tons was Manila hemp, and only 33 tons were American hemp. So this quarter-mile rope walk was constructed of granite walls and a slate roof, and it's still standing strong. And you'll hear more about that in the Boston Hemp History video. Now, hemp played a role in America's nascent printing industry as hemp fabric was recycled as input in the paper-making process. Hemp's long fibers make for durable clothing and high-quality paper. Fast forward to today, and we can see that hemp's recycling capabilities are again front and center in people's thoughts. Hemp seed oil was also used to light lamps, but documented instances of the use of hemp seed oil as a fuel in food during this period is scarce. This is why we need more in-depth research in this area. Hemp was first planted in Kentucky near Danville in 1775. In 1790, hemp fiber was first advertised for sale in local papers. The hemp industry rapidly expanded, and Kentucky became the industry center for the next 100 years. Most of Kentucky's hemp was grown in the bluegrass region that includes Fayette, Woodford, Jessamine, Garrard, Clark, Bourbon, Boyle, Scott, and Shelby counties. In 1811, there were almost 60 rope walks in Kentucky, and by the late 1850s, more than 1/3 of the 400 bagging, bale rope, and cordage factories in America were located in Kentucky. Later in the century, the production of cordage and bagging did not prove to be profitable using domestic hemp, so its cultivation decreased as imported manila and jute fibers were substituted. James Hopkins wrote an excellent book, A History of the Hemp Industry in Kentucky, in which he provides a detailed look of this once vital industry from its heady inception to its meek demise. Hemp was first grown in Missouri in 1835. By 1840, the Show Me State produced 12,500 tons of hemp fiber, making it one of the largest hemp-growing states in the country. A hempen footnote to the Civil War took place in September 1861 in Lexington, Missouri, at what came to be known as the Battle of the Hemp Bales. A Union garrison of 3,000 men had hunkered down on a hill overlooking the Missouri River. The Confederate Missouri State Guard consolidated their forces and marched on Lexington. After 2 days of heavy fighting, the Missouri State Guard started using hemp bales that were awaiting shipment downriver as movable breastworks. They soaked the hemp bales in water to prevent the Union troops from catching them on fire, and they were able to fight their way up the hill and win the battle. Reenactments of this historic battle are still held periodically in Lexington, and visitors can still see a cannonball lodged in a column of the Lafayette County Courthouse in Lexington, Missouri. An article written by L.J. Bradford of Augusta, Kentucky, in the 1863 report of the Commissioner of Agriculture noted that the climate in Kentucky was too hot for dew-retting hemp, and that Kentucky did not have enough natural lakes and streams to adequately water-ret its hemp. Bradford did note that states north of Kentucky, including Iowa, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, have vast advantages over Kentucky and Missouri. These advantages included their colder climates and more numerous fresh water resources. Bradford ended his report by writing, quote, "I have endeavored to describe the whole process as practiced by the best growers in Kentucky. The same mode will certainly apply to Iowa up to the retting process. With her advantages, steeping in soft water is entirely practicable, by which she will produce an article of water-rotted hemp, perhaps in no respect inferior to the highest-priced Russian, which is fully double the value of American dew-rotted, the only sort produced in this state." Sadly, Bradford's 1863 prediction of a robust hemp industry developing in Iowa and other northern states did not occur. Hemp was grown in the eastern part of Illinois near Champaign and Rantoul from 1875 to 1902. Trial crops were grown successfully near Houston, Texas in 1899 and 1900. Nebraska's hemp industry existed from 1887 and 1910, existed between 1887 and 1910 near Fremont and Havelock. And in 1910, the areas of hemp cultivation outside of Kentucky included fields near Lincoln, Nebraska, Coates and North Liberty, Indiana, and Hanover, Pennsylvania. It was also being grown experimentally in Michigan, Minnesota, Iowa, and Arkansas. California, too, grew hemp in many areas from around 1900 to 1920, including Gridley in Butte County, the Cortland in the lower Sacramento Valley, Rio Vista in Solano County, and Lerdo near Bakersfield. So, it seems that it is possible to cultivate hemp in many regions of the country. In fact, this picture shows that cannabis can almost be grown throughout the entire United States. This picture is from the United States Department of Agriculture Handbook number 366 called Selected Weeds of the United States. It was published in 1970. Of course, by 1970, the war on drugs was in full swing, so cannabis was in a book of selected weeds, as opposed to a book of valued agriculture crops.